Getting students to build their own musicality, it can be challenging, especially when on one hand we're trying to balance note reading and playing what's written, but then also creating a unique interpretation. In this video, I am sharing 3 ways to help or guide intermediate piano students to develop their own musicality as they play repertoire. Be sure to stay to the end, as I will be not only reviewing these, but I will also add a bonus tip there at the end. I'm Rosemarie Penner from Must Love Music, and I help make learning piano simple, fun, and interactive, with creative ideas and resources to bring on those smiles. As I've developed as a teacher, I find myself asking more questions and really guiding my students to develop their own ideas of what is musical. And rather than my students all playing the same song exactly the same, I want to hear those subtle differences that let me know they really thought about what exactly is the composer asking and what am I feeling in this song. Way number 1 is dynamics. When we look at intermediate level music, it tends to have more options for students in terms of where they can go with dynamic levels. There's certain things that are assumed that they would know at that level, versus at an elementary level, the music tends to be very clear about this is where it's piano, this is where it's forte, and so on. Now, this is a perfect opportunity for students to really explore the full range of what each dynamic level can be. For example, the volume level that you would play piano could be different from song to song. It all depends on what it is. If it's the melody line, even if it's piano, you might be playing it closer to a mezzo piano level, versus if it's an accompaniment pattern, then maybe you're playing it on the lower end of what that range could be. In the piece, The Grand Entrance, this one, it's so festive and it's really meant to be a fun song for students to play. In a particular section, there is a crescendo. However, there is no starting dynamic written, and that's because this could go a few ways. You could start quite quiet, you could start maybe a little bit louder, and how much it builds is really up to the student. So I'll give you a little example here on how quickly you could build and then how far you might want to build that crescendo. And again, this is up to a student to be able to experiment and try out. So that one started okay. It wasn't super loud, it wasn't super anything, but let's try a little bit different. So there we have a little bit more dynamic variety. Way number 2 is through articulation. Look, sometimes it's just easy to make an articulation happen as it's written. And other times it takes a little experimentation to get the sound just right. So for example, a legato could be something where you're using more of a wrist and arm motion, or maybe even if the legato is traveling up or down, there's even elbow movement. The curvature of the fingers. Is it that the fingers are going to be very curved? Or, and this was something that really blew my mind, perhaps your fingers might be a little flatter in order to create the sound you want. I didn't even realize we were allowed to do that. But you could change the curvature of the fingers. Or you can also use pedal, or what's also known as finger pedaling. So using your fingers to create that legato sound. So there's tons of options here, and none of them are going to fit for every single song. In Waltz Under the Stars, there's a really great example of this that requires a little bit of experimentation. So it's meant to be very sweet and played piano, but again, it needs a very light touch while still staying legato, and this can be challenging for some students. So we want to make the waltz pattern within this very clear without it becoming overpowering. And then the right hand has some parallel third intervals, which some students can find challenging. And so how do we bring out that melody? And again, choosing which note will be the melody without auditory clutter. the song goes on to actually have some parallel sixth, and again, trying to find that way of bringing out the melody. But it's just a quick example of where students can make these artistic decisions by testing out different things. Way 3 is voicing. At the intermediate level, this becomes incredibly important. Now it's not just, is my right hand or left hand going to be having the dominant voicing, but which voice within a hand is going to bring out the dominant voicing. And so letting students experiment, even if it doesn't sound great to your ears, it helps them develop their ear over time. And so anytime that there might be an option for 2 different kinds of voicing, I really want my students to experiment with this and then make a decision that works for them. An example of this is the Gnomes Starlit Dance. So there's a particular section that it has these 7th chords with really unique textures. Students can experiment here, and honestly, they could choose to really highlight the chords, or they could choose to highlight the accompaniment pattern. And either way, it's actually going to sound pretty good. It's actually going to sound really great. And so depending on what the student likes, they can actually choose to highlight one of those as the melody. So that was highlighting the chords, but what if I switch it up and now the accompaniment pattern becomes that melody line? I think what I like about being able to choose is that the chords, they give almost a more final sound while still also feeling a little unfinished. Whereas if it's the accompaniment pattern, for me, it always feels like it has more of a forward flowing motion. And so it changes the mood depending on what you opt to do there. So here are 3 ways to help intermediate piano students develop their musicality and as they're playing their repertoire. First, dynamics. Really explore the full range of what each of those can be, and this is for each hand. Number 2 is articulation. So experiment with options that create the articulation for a nuanced sound. 3, voicing. Now, it doesn't always have to be the typical melody. I know not everyone's going to agree with me, but it's true. It doesn't always have to be the typical one. And bonus tip, get your students to highlight something that they find interesting in the music. It might be a particular chord or a turn of phrase. Exploring how to bring those out, it adds a really great dimension to your teaching, but it also takes your students' musicality to another level as they're making even more decisions on their own. If you enjoyed the musical excerpts that you heard within this video, be sure to check out the description below. I've included links to each of the songs, and these all come from the Scenes of Spring Piano Solo collection. And I would love to hear from you. Which of these 3 tips or these 3 ways to develop musicality for your intermediate piano students do you think that you're going to use the most? Be sure to let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and be sure to hit the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on future videos like this one.